Yes, good afternoon. I'm here to talk about a body of groundwater modelling that we've done in the Pike floodplain. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge my co-contributors to this, Virginia at the back there and Juliet. The Pike floodplain is located approximately 200 kilometres northeast of Adelaide, near the border of South Australia and Victoria. So this work is based in the same area as Chris's work that we've just heard about. So why are we doing this? So first and foremost, we're looking to improve the health of the Pike floodplain. So here are two photos that we took on a field trip, and I think we can agree that it looks fairly average. The Pike floodplain has been the focus of the South Australian Riverland Floodplains Integrated Infrastructure Program, or SARFIP, with this model intended being part of the decision and assessment framework. We're looking to further our understanding of the Pike floodplain, and we're looking to provide a tool to assess management options, which will then support investigations into ecological impacts. And along the way, we'd like to advance the state of groundwater modelling in the River Murray. Of course, doing this kind of modelling leads to a whole bunch of challenges which we need to face. First and foremost, it requires us to understand floodplain processes in a very dynamic system. And these might be recharge to the water table, or evapotranspiration, or the interaction between surface water and groundwater. The spatial and temporal scales that we've chosen in this case also require a high amount of data, so there's a lot of data processing going on here. Along the way, we've also had a bunch of questions cropping up, such as what constitutes an impact or benefit to the floodplain, and what constitutes an ecological impact in the model. So the model construction is partly based on previous work, specifically the Pike Mertho and Berry Renmark salinity register groundwater models, which are done by Juna. And it incorporates data and knowledge from multiple sources which are listed there, one of which is Chris's work that we've just heard about. The take-home message from this is that this model isn't made in isolation. You know, we rely on a lot of different sources of information, and a lot of projects go into this. So here's a block diagram of the model. The basic model setup here is 4 layers, and it mirrors Tim's work that we saw earlier. For our purposes, we're mainly looking at the top couple layers here, so that's where the floodplain is sitting. So this diagram gives us a feel for how much detail or spatial detail is in this model. As I said, lots of data gets put into this. So an example of the dynamic data that we put into this is the river height at Lock 5. So a lot of movement going on, and this is just one of the data sets. We have a lot of other data sets which have this sort of dynamic response. The model has been calibrated to observed water levels both inside and outside of the floodplain, and has been considered fit for purpose by our independent reviewer. So with a calibrated model, we can move on and perform a few model scenarios, and I'll present some results here. So I've got 3 scenarios to talk about here. Each of them are run over a 40-year period, and each of them assume a historic climate conditions, so what's happened in the past is going to happen in the future, which is possibly not realistic. And it also assumes that the current irrigation on ground continues forward. The 3 scenarios are the do nothing case, which is business as usual, the do something case, which is let's construct some regulators and we'll implement some floodplain inundation, and we can do a little more, and on top of that we can put in some groundwater management systems on both the floodplain and highland to mitigate the impacts of the inundation. So the model provides many results that we can use to inform management, but I'll concentrate on just one, and that's depth to water. The reason for this being that shallow water tables are considered a risk factor in increased evaporation, which in turn increases the concentration of salt in the floodplain. So here's the results of our base case or do nothing, and I'll just explain what this is telling us. We have a whole bunch of sites here which have been selected by junior ecologists as being of interest for vegetation health. We've got 25 of those. The colour of each point represents the amount of time that the water table spends near the surface. So green is good, it doesn't spend much time near the surface. And red, obviously, bad, because it spends most of its time near the surface. So when the water table is close to the surface, it is subject to more evapotranspiration and salts will concentrate. So as a summary of those results, we can see just if we do nothing, we have 12 sites here that spend a lot of time near the surface, and we have 6 sites which spend a lot, the majority of their time at greater than 2.5 metres from the surface. So we propose some inundation. So we can see here that the inundation occurs primarily along existing surface water. We'll expect that the water table in the floodplain will increase, and this gives us a potential for increased evapor concentration and also increased salt flux into the rivers. So the results from this one, and we can immediately see that we're getting a lot more sites where the water table stays close to the surface. So this gives us the potential for an increased evapor concentration and also salt flux to the river. And the summary of that shows that. We have a lot more sites here, 15 in total, which now spend more than 85% of their time near the surface, or within 2.5 metres of the surface. And we've also seen a decrease here. We've now got 5 sites which spend the majority of their time below that level. So we propose some groundwater management. So in this case, we're looking at some highland pumping bores and some floodplain pumping bores. So the idea here is to offset the negatives that we've induced, or potentially induced, from the inundation from the previous scenario. So we're looking to decrease the water table here, which will in turn decrease the amount of evaporation, and also it'll decrease the flux to the rivers. And so here we have our results. And I guess in this case, this is the proposed highland groundwater management scheme, and we also have the floodplain version here. And so immediately we can see that we have a big string here of sites where the water table is spending the majority of its time at greater than 2.5 metres from the surface. This is particularly evident near the groundwater management system on the floodplain. You can also see that the effect of the groundwater management systems extends right across the floodplain. So the summary of this shows, demonstrates these results. We have a massive increase in the amount of sites which spend the majority of their time at greater than 2.5 metres, and we have seen a slight decrease in the amount of sites which spend the amount of time close to the surface. So, just to summarise these scenarios, floodplain inundation provides a number of potential positive outcomes for the floodplain, such as it provides water for the floodplain, potentially improves vegetation health, and there's the potential for development of freshwater lenses. But it also brings potential negative side effects, such as pushing salt into the river system, and it could possibly increase evapor concentration. So, groundwater management, we're seeking to mitigate these negative impacts, and they potentially have their own positive impacts. So, groundwater management lowers the water table in the floodplain, decreases the likelihood of evapor concentration, and there's the potential development of freshwater lenses. So, everything is awesome. And we've fixed everything, we can go home. Not quite. So, this is a diagram, a flowchart, of how this model can inform management. So, the assumptions in our model and results mean that we've really only looked at the top half of this flowchart. So if we were to extend our model to have a solute transport model, then it'll help us understand this lower half. I guess the main considerations here are what is the impact of mixing, so freshwater from inundation mixing with the saline groundwater, and how significant is evapor concentration. So, in summary, we have developed a complex groundwater model which incorporates data from a multitude of sources. We've improved our understanding of the dynamic floodplain processes, and we've also run management scenarios which include infrastructure, inundation and groundwater pumping. And in the future, we're hoping to extend this to a solute transport model. Along the way, though, we should never lose sight of our ultimate aim here, which is to help bring the Pike floodplain back to life. Thank you. I'm sure there is. I mean, the whole point of this model, I guess, is to collate a lot of this data, so from various sources. So, and I guess your question would probably be answered better in a solute transport model, version of this. So this version, not so much, but possibly a solute transport model, density-dependent model, that could possibly feed into that.
I guess I was thinking, maybe Adrian can comment, whether the simple model, the sharp interface model, as opposed to the complex model, could be used to solve some of those questions.
Yeah, Mark Batten developed the SWI package, which is a simple sharp interface model. You can take a ground with flow line like Carl can convert it, but I think the difficult part, and Carl will probably comment on this, is the freshwater inundation has to travel through the unsaturated zone before it gets to the water table. So the conversion from inundation to freshwater lands, and maybe this is Chris's area too, is then, you have to then make assumptions about that. So how much of Chris's freshwater flushing ends up as freshwater lands is, I don't know, even? No.
What I do like about this session is that all the people working here are obviously communicate with each other a lot, and there's great opportunity for these conversations. environmental impact.
You might have already covered this, I might have missed it, but what sort of format is the modelling in, or what sort of coding system is used?
Okay, so this one has been done under the Groundwater Vistas interface, and we're using ModFlow NWT with the upwind weighting package.
And my question sort of is the inverse of the question for Handy, which probably should we go back to Avian. Doesn't the work that you've just demonstrated indicate that a simple model is good for looking at processes, but if you're living in such a dynamic world as you've just described, the simple model itself might fall down. You would look at all that river level variation. So that was the question I was trying to get at earlier.
I can answer it. Sure. So simple models are good for two things. One is they get your intuition heading in the right direction, because people don't often make decisions based on models. They make decisions based on standing out on the floodplain, taking some measurements and going, well, what the hell am I going to do now? So the idea of the simple work that I did was trying to guide people's intuition so they don't have to do this kind of modelling. So, but you're right, you can't take the analysis that I showed, walk out onto a floodplain with dynamic this, that and everything else, and go, all right, so the answer's 6, great. Yeah, no, you can't. I mean, you have to be able to conceptualise where you're standing into something that's simple enough that, you know, but the thing with mine is you can stick that into Excel and have an answer in 35 seconds. You know, to do a density-dependent, variably saturated flood inundation model is going to take a year and a half to build and about a year and a half to run. So potentially in real time, you know, 6 weeks for a 6-week simulation. So, you know, it's horses for courses. It's how much money do you have? How much time do you want to spend? How smart are you? And you know, all those kinds of things. So it's just another tool from the toolbox. But you're right. It's not universally. It's not the universal tool.